Okay, everyone, we're going to get started. All right, here we go. Hello, everyone. My name is Jordan Landis, and I am the co-president of Mizrachi OU-JLIC Hertzliya. Thank you. Before we begin our event tonight, I want to take a moment just to acknowledge the horrific terror attacks that occurred yesterday in Jaffa and Jerusalem. In Jerusalem, Eliyahu David K., 26 years old and a former lone soldier from South Africa, was murdered by a Hamas terrorist. Our community has a strong connection with Eliyahu, as many students here served with Eliyahu in the army or had a connection to him from back home. While we are excited for our event tonight, we are still in disbelief and mourning over this tragedy. We are fortunate to have a close-knit community that is focused on staying strong together throughout this difficult time. We pray that all of Israel and the Jewish people see only peace in the future, and that the K family finds strength during this difficult time for all of Israel. Tonight, in partnership with TAMID and the investment group here at Reichman University, we are honored to host a conversation with Michael Eisenberg and Rosenson from Aleph. A big thanks to all our sponsors for tonight and everyone behind the scenes who helped make this wonderful event happen. Specifically, Andrew Jacobson, who spearheaded this night into existence, along with the help of Rav Jonathan Shulman, Rav Josh and Margot Bawanik, Eli Sarfati, and Lotan Rosen. I also like to acknowledge Professor Niran Ashai, Dean of the Arison School, who is joining us tonight. Tonight we're going to be hearing from two prolific leaders in the venture capital and business world who are having an enormous impact on the Israeli tech ecosystem. Michael Eisenberg is one of the top venture capitalists in Israel. Since 2013, Michael has been the co-founder and managing partner of the VC fund Aleph. No managing partners. Aleph has been consistently ranked as Israel's top venture capital fund, and Michael is regularly featured on the Forbes Midas list of the world's most successful venture capitalists. Michael's investment record represents much of the history of Israel's amazing technology revolutions, with investments in Answers.com, Wix, Gigia, and more recently Lemonade, Honeybook, Empathy, Nexstar, and more. In addition, Michael is heavily involved in charitable and philanthropic efforts, serving on the boards of Yeshivat Har Etzion and the Israeli agricultural organization HaShomer HaChadash. He is the founder of the Israeli organization, the Nevo Network, which helps Olim integrate into high tech. I can also personally attest to the fact that Michael is incredibly giving of his time to those who are looking to build a successful life in Israel. But we are here tonight celebrating Michael's most recent book, The Tree of Life and Prosperity, which is his 7th book. The Tree of Life and Prosperity has hit the #1 new release on Amazon in both the categories of business ethics and Old Testament commentaries. Feel free to purchase a copy after the event, where Michael will be signing. Also joining us tonight is Rosenson. Aaron has spent the past decade finding, investing in, and scaling software businesses. Active investments include Bring, CoreLogics, Placer, Workis, and Centrical. Aaron began his career at Insight Partners, sourcing a number of Insight's largest deals, including WalkMe and HelloFresh. Aaron is a JLIC alumnus, graduating from the Wharton School of the University of Pennsylvania before making Aliyah and coming to Israel, where he became one of the youngest partners at Aleph. Both Michael and Aaron represent strong Torah and Zionist values that are echoed across the Israeli ecosystem and are an inspiration to us at JLIC and many other organizations across campus. We are building a special community here in Hertzliya, and we will gain so much strength from your presence and words here tonight. A few weeks ago in an interview with Rabbi Ari Lamb, Michael said, "Community is becoming an ever more important function in innovation, where creativity and the entrepreneurial spirit has never been more important. This is a community of dreamers from across the world who chose to make Israel their home. We continue to look for guidance and inspiration, and we know tonight will help push us further down the path to reaching our individual and collective goals." Michael and Aaron, please.
Hot.
We are world-leading investors in technology. In all seriousness,
Thank you, everybody, for joining us here tonight. I just wanted to take a moment before we start to give my gratitude and appreciation to Rabbi Jonathan Shulman, who I first met when I was at Penn 10 years ago as I was becoming religious and more observant. he was in the unenviable position of answering some downright strange questions, halakhic and otherwise, as I tried to balance life as president of a fraternity and a halakhically compliant and spiritually oriented Jew. It was a weird time, and thankfully not a transient one. But we've kept the relationship ever since then, and you all don't know how lucky you are to have someone like him, so well balanced and just a good man and a good rabbi at the helm, leading OU-JLIC stuff. And thanks again, everyone, for being here tonight. I think it's gonna be just back and forth, and we'll chat a little bit. This is really great. When I was like 23 and doing these crazy late night jobs at Insight, I'd go back at Insight Partners, the fund I used to work at. I'd go back in these cabs later, and I don't think you know this. I would read Michael's blog as I walked back, and I'd think, man, if I could live in Israel one day, it'd be like this guy and do this work. And so it's such a bracha to be here, and looking forward to having this evening with you all. Michael, so maybe to start, what was going on for you in your mind when it came to writing this book versus your others? What were the ideas that made you say, instead of this being a blog post, I actually want to spend time and dive deep on this particular subject?
Yeah. First of all, Aaron, thank you for agreeing to do this. Normally our conversations are less relaxed in the partner meeting. We're trying to get to kind of what's going on with the deal, what's going on in the firm, and everyone's kind of zoned in, et cetera. And this almost feels like a more relaxing conversation. So thank you for doing this.
Yeah.
And then, I just want to echo something Jordan said before about Eliyahu K. So you mentioned before, I chaired the organization, the Shomer Chadash, which is Israel's largest volunteer organization. And Eliyahu, you can actually see it in the picture that was just about in every article of him holding like a broccoli or volunteering on a farm. And as an organization, in addition to as a people, we lost somebody very special in beyond horrific circumstances. And I just want to acknowledge not just his life and his passing, but also his contribution to Israel, to the Shomer Chadash, before we get started tonight. Yehi Zichro Baruch. I didn't sit down to write a book. By the way, I didn't sit down to write. I've written 7 books, and I did not sit down to write any of the first bunch. Already when it got to the one on Shmot and Vayikra, I sat down to write the books. But all of what's written in the books started as conversations with my children at the Shabbat table. And inevitably, when you read a text, and by the way, it's true about any text, not just the biblical text of the Torah, everybody brings their own lens. I've said probably 50 times already that the Ibn Ezra, Rabbi Avraham Ibn Ezra, who was a medieval exegete in Spain, he was a pauper. He was poor. And he saw everything that he wrote almost through that lens. He was also, by the way, a linguist. So he saw some other things through that lens. And Rabbi Yitzchak Dona Bar Benel, who was the finance minister of Portugal at the time of Girush Sfarad, hated the monarchy. It wasn't an accident. He looked around and saw what happened in Spain and said, it's a terrible idea. So everybody brings their personal life experience to reading texts, even texts as timeless as the Torah, as the Bible. And like I said, it started as conversations, and I then wrote up my notes after Shabbat, and over some number of years, I expanded on the notes and sent out to a WhatsApp group of like 120, 140 people. And then someone said, you ought to turn this into a book. So I said, I don't know if I was reading it. Someone else said, you ought to turn this into a book. And so I turned it into a book. And then the book sold well in Hebrew. And I was surprised. And it found an audience that was non-obvious to me, which is, there was obviously someone I would call biblical audience or religious audience. But I also found myself, I was invited to high-tech companies to give a shiur. Not an obvious place, or to give a talk on the book. And it found a very, very broad audience in Israel. And then somebody said, you ought to translate it to English. And so we did. And then an amazing thing happened. In addition to my amazing editor in Hebrew, Harav Amit Misgav, I got called by a guy named Adam Bellow, who edited a key book by Professor Bloom from the University of Chicago named The Closing of the American Mind. That was before wokeism even. And this guy is just an amazing professional editor. And he then took the English translation and turned it into the book that's outside there and just did an amazing job. I, of course, added and re-edited afterwards, but that's how the book came out. And it's found a surprisingly wide audience, too. I continue to be surprised by it. I think our publisher was also surprised by it, witness of the fact that we didn't print enough books. And when we print them, they seem to keep selling out. So it's just been a tremendous bracha. And I apologize, by the way, for my raspy voice. I spent last week doing 11 speeches in 5 cities in America because Andrew, who does an amazing job, worked me to the bone last week, and I lost my voice. So thank you for tolerating it.
Great, that's great. You failed to mention that the proceeds of the books are going to charity, so I'll mention that. So given that the sort of the genesis of this book and the lens, so to speak.
Pun intended.
Given that the origins of this book came kind of out of your kids, and given that everyone has their sort of lens and unique perspective in their time and place, how would you articulate the unique lens of Anglo kids, second-generation immigrants growing up in Jerusalem? What's that lens versus those folks in America or your generation or my generation growing up in America?
So my kids are Israeli. Like, for real, they're all born here. Even though I wrote the book in Hebrew because there's no accent in the written word, I think they still hear me talking there on some level. I think the more interesting question is, how does this kind of timeless wisdom of the Torah, of the Bible, meet the 21st century? And that's something I think that hasn't been explored sufficiently. And I'll take a step back. 73 years ago, this state was founded. And it was an amazing time. It's 3 years post the Holocaust. And Ben-Gurion stands up and says, this can be a safe haven for the Jewish people, and we can get an ingathering of the exiles. I don't think in his wildest imagination he thought that within 10 years, all of North Africa and the Arab countries would empty out their Jews. But it actually did what it was supposed to do, and accepted Olim. So much so, and then you had the war in 56, and the war in 67, the war in 73, and the first Lebanon War and the second Lebanon War. And as a country, we've been kind of in a survival mode, and as almost an ir miklat, a place to gather people in from around the world. We haven't stopped to consider the second part of the Declaration of Independence, Megillat Ha'atzmaut, where he says that we will be established according to the Chazon HaNevi'im, right? Which is, we need to ask ourselves, 73 years into the founding of the state, what is a uniquely Israeli economy? What is a uniquely Israeli civic square? What is a uniquely Israeli democracy? It should not look like the United States. It should not look like the UK. It should not look like Germany. And it shouldn't look like China for sure. So, what is that? And I think we've actually got the basics of a blueprint, because what I think the Torah is after is a economy and civic square that builds peoplehood and solidarity and brotherhood. What I call in Hebrew kalkalat achva, and in English the responsibility economy or the empowerment economy. Or after is an economy where people can be prosperous, very prosperous. We're a prosperous country right now. And where we can empower other people to also do well, because empowering other people builds solidarity. Enabling other people to succeed builds solidarity. And the question I'm really after with my kids is, what does the next 73 years of the state of Israel look like? And given the winds of technology, maybe we got something to offer and export. I keep telling the joke that we had no water. We used to export orange water, right, oranges. And recently, if you think about it, it's like crazy. We're exporting Israeli culture, like Fauda, Tehran, Miznon, the restaurant. No one would have thought this 20 years ago, but it matters. So we may have a chance to export an economic vision that's thousands of years old, but just lacked interpretation to the 21st century. That's kind of what I think about. I want to translate into a 21st century technological economy the foundational principles of our people.
Absolutely, and that unique culture which is in Israel is so much more intertwined with the economics and the society that's built here. And I mean, what would you say to someone who has, goes to study an IDC Hertzliya, who has an affinity, maybe even like a brutal pragmatism towards the inseparability of their Jewish identity and their need to have association with Israel, with their own Jewish culture and peoplehood, but ultimately sees the Torah, sees these sorts of documents as things that are less relevant than the identity and peoplehood and the humanism of it. As in, you could project, if someone were to say the claim, you could project any idea you want to say onto the text and give it meaning, but ultimately the Torah specifically isn't as meaningful as Jewish solidarity, peoplehood, being a good guy or gal and whatever. How would you speak to someone like that about the relevance of the Torah and lessons that it can teach in modern times?
That is a great question. I'll answer the question you said, and then I'll go back to the beginning. So I think people know if they read a sefer, a book, or whatever it is, whether this is forced on a text or comes from the text. We kind of are all smart enough to know whether when we read something, it's kind of, oh, that's a reasonable interpretation of the text, or that's somebody bringing some outside idea and enforcing it on the text. I hope that I took it out of the text rather than enforced it on the text. The being a good person thing versus what I would call a particularistic view of the Torah. Not particularistic in terms of, we're us and you're you, but rather, what do we have to say about the topic? So, number one, the Torah, the Bible, generally has more unique users than Google and Facebook combined over history. It has stood the test of time and found relevance in every generation. And that's important to point out. Things that lose relevance don't get read anymore. And somehow, this is read by hundreds of millions of people a year, still. And it's 3,000 or 4,000 years old. 4,000. It's pretty stunning. And worth taking note of. The second thing is, when I published the book in Hebrew, we did this panel with Harav Benny Lau. And someone said, what'd you learn from the book? And he said, I learned that people are people, families are families, there's strife, there's family businesses, people work, they get wealthier, they get poorer, there are economic recessions. Nothing's changed in 3,000 or 4,000 years. And you read through the text, if you read through it through a modern lens, you'll see that the topics are as relevant as ever. I got news for you, you spend most of your waking hours working at something and involved in economic life. Same was true in the time of the Torah, and it describes that, right? So, Abraham, we deal with his wealth. The word wealth appears 7 times right at the beginning of the story of Abraham, and we learn about his cattle and his gold and his silver. And the Torah takes great lengths to tell us about Isaac planting his fields and how successful he was at that. And Jacob's ups and downs and his fight with his treacherously bedeviling father-in-law and the fight among the siblings over what the economy is going to be. Is it going to be a shepherding economy that the brothers knew, or an agricultural economy that Joseph knew? And so all these things are woven into the biblical narrative. Even in the yeshivot, they spend most of their time on torts and economics of ownership. That's what we spend our time dealing with. So if this is a real text meant to lay a blueprint, and this is the answer to your question, for a society, and not just a kind of ephemeral religious text, which is not what I think it is, it's a blueprint for a cohesive society, then the economy is at the core of a cohesive society. And economies change. And like Abraham, who arrives wealthy in the land of Canaan and land of Israel, his first encounter is a recession. There was a ra'av, a famine. There's a recession. There are recessions, and there are good times and bad times and up times. It's all there. If it wasn't important, trust me, it wouldn't be there. But this is not some kind of spiritual do-good things. This is like real life with real problems, with real strife, and a blueprint. And that's why I think it continues to be relevant.
Yeah, and you brought up the point about the economic participation and that sort of main theme that exists throughout there. And I guess, in modern days, when you think about, I feel a lot of people in college have this thought about economic participation, and so much of joining with Israeli society and part of this story is participation in this economy here as well. But when you think about the common problem people have they have networks back in the U.S., back in Europe, career paths there, better land prices potentially, other things like that. I for one am have more sympathetic to the idea of build up a certain amount of expertise maybe within the U.S. ecosystem, transition over and be part of the Israeli nationalistic, ethical peoplehood story then. And I know you historically have had a tougher view of no, jump right in here and be part of this economy right now here. How would you recommend someone here who's maybe thinking about those trade-offs to think about those trade-offs?
I wouldn't describe it as a tougher view. It's a different view. Lenses, yeah. So I think ideals matter a lot. We don't talk about them. But our ability to get through ups and downs, and we all have them, comes back to resilience, and resilience comes back to a North Star, which is an ideal. And I think we preach way too much practicality to young people today. And on some level, don't take this literally, but if you can't figure out on what hill you want to die on, there's nothing worth living for. And so you have to ask yourself, what matters in my life? And you got to ask that actually at a young age. And for me at least, it was, I wanted to be a part of the future. So I wanted to be about a future where I thought the Jewish people was, which is here. I wanted to be about a society that's resilient and not flaky or snowflakey. Where resilience is inbred. My kids are more resilient than their peers in the United States. That's the economy I can speak to. It's the one I know. That's not this one. And I think kind of turning up young makes you more resilient. My wife likes to say we made Aliyah so our kids wouldn't have to make the decision. And I think there is more, I'll use two French expressions, esprit de corps, arvut hadadit, responsibility for one another that exists in Israel than almost anywhere else on the planet. At the same time, there's more joie de vivre, love of life, that you see in Tel Aviv than almost anywhere else around. And at the same time, it's still an idealistic country. Not everyone, not everywhere, but it's still there. And I don't think we're in this world. You're all going to die, I got news for you. All of us do. When we're young, we don't feel it, but we all will. And I just don't think we're in this world, to kind of do a little better. It's to find something where we can contribute meaningfully to a goal that is larger than ourselves. Contribute meaningfully to a goal that's larger than yourself. For me, when I got inspired to come here, it was in the early 90s, to come build an economy, Israeli economy in the early 90s. Everyone knows this. It wasn't like it is today. Things are much better today. We're a strong country today. It's a wealthy country at the end of the day. For what it's worth, I'll open a set of parentheses. I think the Bank of Israel has got this totally wrong. They think they're a weak country, so we keep weakening the shekel. We're not. We are a strong country, and we need to embrace the strong shekel. And what an opportunity that is to try to make a positive influence on the world from here, where we have this esprit de corps, the arvut hadadit, and the joie de vivre, and the love of life, and this resilience and a resilient mentality. To me, I don't want to get there as fast as possible.
Yeah, it's absolutely. And I mean, just thinking, if you believe that in any sort of industrial revolution, the people on the right side of that historical change are the ones that are persistent. And if you look at other, people who are part of this information technology industrial revolution, and see that this is the only country that's not running a massive deficit with confidence that their currency is going to be as valuable as it's going to be in the future. There's a lot to like about the macro setup here, for sure, if we believe that.
A lot to like about the idealism also. I go back to Shomer Chadash, okay? I see thousands and tens of thousands of young people taking a day off, taking a night off. And by the way, and working age people would take one night off a month to go guard a farm. I know anyone like that in America. Sit out in the cold, patrols at the farm, and go to sleep at night. I go to, the Shomer Festival every year. I go see the life in these kids. I don't see that anywhere else. And it's, in the toughness, mental toughness, to get through things. It's just developed in the Army and it's developed there. I don't see that in other places. And I think it's really meaningful. And it matters.
What do you, that's very relevant in terms of all the benefits this society has to offer. What do Olim from, whether it's from the U.S., Canada, Australia, the U.K., many other countries as well, what do you think are the main things that Israel and Israeli society should be looking to take away from these people and who choose to set out here in their 20s or 30s and make life here?
One of the hardest things is, you mentioned it earlier, is a professional network. Look, if you've come from abroad, you know people. You get here, you know nobody. Just life. And one of the reasons I set up this Niveau network, which is a professional networking organization for Olim, for immigrants in tech, and we have people, I think, now from 8 or 9 countries, is to help them build a professional network here. Because our research showed that if you don't have a professional network here, you get your first job, you don't get your second one, and then you think of leaving. So if you can solve the second job, you can be more successful. I mentioned earlier in this little dinner we did that we've had a couple of Niveau fellows who said that they're more successful professionally here than they would ever be in the States or than their peers are, because you can get accelerated here faster because it's a smaller country. You just need the network. So what can society take? And this is mostly, I mention this because my learnings from Niveau. One is, I know it sounds funny, but English. Like, if you speak a foreign language, English, French, Spanish, every Israeli tech company, I mostly know tech, needs foreign language speakers, content writers, people who can help. It actually matters a ton. That's number one. Number two, for those of you who haven't paid attention, Israel's a tiny market. So also familiarity with a foreign market helps. My son, by the way, who grew up here but has an American passport, has been sent off by startup company headquarters here now to Dallas and to Boston and other places as like the English speaker American. Had to go do that. By the way, when the Army sent him off to Cyprus, he was like the translator of the Cyprus group in his commando unit. And it's like, foreign languages matter. And being able to speak it without an accent matters. So that's the first thing. Knowing those markets and who to call maybe matters also. The next thing I think that matters is what network can you bring from wherever you came from to the benefit of that company. And because culturally you're more similar to wherever you came from, you can, look, I've been living here 28 years. It's the vast majority of my life. There are large parts of me that are still more New York than they are Israel. Maybe a lot. It's just life. Where we grow up 4 to 14 is who we are as adults. And my Hebrew's fluent. I've written books in Hebrew still. And so that familiarity with where you came from matters. And the last thing I'll mention is, as an immigrant, you just see the world differently. You don't take things as obvious from the way you grew up, because they're not. And so you're able to question things that go on here more. And that's super valuable, and the country desperately needs more people who question what's going on as we scale up as a country.
I'll say that I think that foreign language skills, networks, and an outside view is a bit of a non-answer to the question of what Israeli culture can take from it. But I'll give you the chance to come back and give a more real answer later if you so choose to. What
were you looking for?
I think I'm looking for where do...
Now this is a partner meeting.
What are the benefits of being from Western society when it comes to whether it's humanism, economic achievement, everything's a series of pros and cons. And what is, when people look back in 20 and 40 years and see the generation of people who came here, why is Israeli society better because of those people, besides of their outside perspective and their networks and language skills?
Now I understand the question. I'm sorry I didn't understand it. Israel is a small country. No matter where you came from, I think it was bigger than Israel. Unless you're from like Estonia. Anyone here from Estonia? I rest my case. Or Luxembourg. Israelis don't inherently understand scale. They understand it more now than they did 20 years ago when I started, because the internet has opened up the world. But when you come from a larger society, you understand scale. And what I hope immigrants can teach Israelis is how to think ever larger and bigger and scale. That's when I think we'll look back and see. Candidly, I used to think that one of the things that Americans in particular and Brits could teach was discourse, how to have a respectful conversation, but that's gone out of style in America at least. I think it's still there in the UK, so I don't think America can teach respectful discourse to anyone right now. So maybe we'll get it from the UK and India at this point. I don't know.
That's fair enough. Switching back to the book, what was the most uncomfortable, challenging part of the book to write, and why?
Telling my personal story at the beginning, and the editor, both editors, but particularly the English language editor, really pushed me on that. And I've now learned, because I just read a book about China written by a guy I know pretty well, and the whole first part of the book is like his personal story. I said, Jacob, what's the deal? He said, my editor pushed me to do this. So I now understand that that's an editor thing, and the more you kind of tell your personal story in the book, the more people kind of get into the book. Even if it's a heavy topic, they can get in an easier way. That was far and away the hardest part for me. Anything you write something that is printed black on white in a soft or hard cover, it doesn't come back. And you can't change the record. And that's always nerve-wracking. And so, I regret the 5 or 6 typos or 7 typos. Andrew just keeping a run on the list in the book. That bothers me. But it wasn't hard because I didn't know it when I did it. So
Maybe in terms of stuff in the book that's maybe interesting to people and a reason they go out and buy it. It's like there's a bunch of stuff you talk about, currencies and land and agriculture and economic stuff. What's maybe some sort of insights from the book on whether with a particular parsha or something do you think is interesting and a good kind of whatever the first 8-page sneak peek sort of thing?
I'll mention a couple quickly. Who here knows who Thomas Malthus was? Oh my God. Nobody. No. Oh my. They teach the humanities here? I know, but he was about the economy too. Thomas Malthus, he has a trap named after him called the Malthusian Trap. Thomas Malthus, an Anglican priest and an economist of sorts, who lived a couple of 100 years ago or so, and he said that people were having too many kids and the world would not be able to feed all these people. So the more prosperous we are and the more kids we have, the less the earth becomes able to feed its inhabitants, and so society collapses. Well, that was 200 years ago and like 7 billion people ago. He was wrong. But this argument comes up over and over. It's so old that it appears in the story of Noah. There was a Thomas Malthus who lived 4,500, 5,000 years ago in the time of Noah. His name was Yered. And Yered, if you read the biblical story, it's pretty obvious, said, stop having children, the land is harsh, it can't feed all humanity, so people start having children at a later age. Until Noah only has children at age 500. That's before he builds an ark in the flood. And then Noah invents the plow, and he unleashes and uncorks the land's bounty. Because innovation actually works. It works. But in every generation, there's a Thomas Malthus. For those of you who read Maureen Dowd of the New York Times, like Apocalypse Now column, like I think of her and all the people who commented on her article as the modern Thomas Malthuses. All these people think the world's been coming end. By the way, when I was a kid in the 70s and 80s, the world was coming to an end then too. It was called acid rain. Any of you know what acid rain is? Did it happen? Are you here? A little acid rain, man. It didn't wipe out humanity. You know what I'm saying? And so this comes up over and over and again. Every time we innovate our way out of it. And so Noah innovates our way with the plow out of it. And he's an innovator. His problem, Noah, is that each of his innovations becomes destructive, like modern innovations, that like drones and AI that could be destructive. But if you put a set of timeless values alongside these innovations, they go right. If you don't, they go sideways. And so it's an important task of your generation to put timeless values alongside whatever super powerful innovations we have. I'll say one more quickly, and then if we have time. So we tend to believe that change is new. But Aaron mentioned that there was an industrial revolution 120 years ago. Now a technological revolution. These things happen all the time. Economies change. And, in the Bible, in the Torah, there's changing economic situations. Abraham was a shepherd, and he had movable wealth because he traveled around. And Yitzchak, Isaac, was a farmer because he's staying put, like the early Zionists. And Yaakov, who had to run away, became a shepherd. And because he went to his father-in-law's house. Then he came back to Israel and tried to become a farmer. Didn't work out. And they went down to Egypt, where Joseph created an agrarian economy, but the brothers couldn't adjust. And so change is constant. And that's okay. The real question is, how do we adapt to change, and how do we apply timeless lessons to that change, timeless values to that change that maintain the cohesiveness of society? People are up and people are down. Technology is up and technology is down. The economy changes. How do we maintain the values to keep society cohesive? That's the core question.
You open up for questions, or yeah? Cool.
Can you give an example of innovation with timeless values?
Again, it's not that the innovation itself. Innovation is neutral. When I was traveling in the States, I kept getting asked about Facebook. Yeah. So I don't think Facebook is bad, right? It's a vessel, just like cable television, by the way. It's a media channel. And Facebook, by the way, for its work, is reflective of the human beings who use it. Oops. But the question is, what are the principles and values you put alongside, or to Aaron's word, you couple with that innovation to make sure it stays on course and is a force for, doesn't have to be a force for agreement, but for cohesiveness rather than polarity. What makes it a force for good rather than evil? How do we keep it out of the hands of evil people? There are evil people in the world. We don't believe everyone is good. Key insight? Not everyone's good. And so, right, one of the Torah's things that it says over time is, Uviarta hara mikirbecha, and you must excise or burn out the evil from within you. There are evil people. They exist. We have to take care of them. What society's supposed to do. For example, we're not doing that in the negative right now. We got a problem. And Chazal, or the sages, say somebody who takes pity on evil people ultimately becomes evil to weak people, or people who need pity. And so there are evil people, and we need to have values and principles that make sure we keep these powerful technologies out of bad people's hands. It's hard, but that's the work. It's not easy, but that's the work. And I think that's the message. I have no idea what it's like to be me. I don't think about it for a second. I get up in the morning, I go to Bet Knesset. I then sit down, and I used to learn Torah. Now I write books. In Hebrew, I'm on volume 4, and in English, I'm on volume 2 of this series. That's how my day starts. Get my kids out, go to work. It's a long day today. Days are long. I wish I was better at sleeping. What do I think about ESG? It's like a check-the-box thing right now. And it's ESG, for those who don't know, is environmental social governance. And I just think these are like relativist bon-ton, newfangled values that they have no measurements for and haven't figured out how to apply yet. So they're investing in Google and Facebook. And then I'm not denigrating Google and Facebook. They probably have good governance. And Secondly, I think ESG in an era of inflation is going to be more inflationary. They're going to impose costs on businesses. They're going to raise prices. They're very, very, very significant. And because it's so fuzzy and mushy-cushy, it'll be more inflationary. And because there's so much money in it now, less money going to ESG funds or whatever that is, so everyone will kowtow to whatever this thing is. And I just don't think these principles are timeless. What issues? Tell me what the issues are. No, what's the issues?
Like global warming?
You guys-
Things like that?
I don't know. You have to tell me what it is. That's part of the problem. You can't. You ask the question, and I think you're a smart guy, but you have a hard time telling me what is it. ESG has nothing to do with consumerism. It's the opposite. It's the opposite. Because there's a lot of money powering into companies that will make more things, by the way, have more debt. And just use an example. If they're investing in Google and Facebook, they don't care that much about your privacy, which leads to more consumerism. Second order effect of lack of privacy.
I think what I'll maybe add is I think that it's I think what's more fundamental than anything, your religiosity is just being a good person, and being a good person is processing the data that's available and doing the right thing on behalf of those around you and putting their well-being first. So I think it's incumbent upon us as a society to process the complex mix of information coming out, statistics coming out, data and cultural trends and expectations that we can engender for one another coming out, and live our lives according to what being a good person is by contemporary standards, and those are standards that are constantly in flux. And I think that
So I see you're very focused on the environmental issues, so which is good. Don't misunderstand me. And I think we need to be focused on the environmental issues. But the real question is, okay, if you want to ask the environmental question, it's not your carbon footprint per se. I must say, there's nothing wrong with the carbon footprint, okay? Ask yourself this question. What is the long-term cost for whoever is damaging the environment, and how do we ensure that that cost is reflected in the financial statements? Rather than having a fund that makes a hoo-ha about the environment, if we understood from a GAAP accounting basis, just use a standard, if Haifa Chemicals is polluting the environment, and that costs the health system money, and that causes people to have cancer, which require people die young, and that's a loss of economic output, let's put that on their P&L. And then we have a true view of the cost to the system, and then any investor can make a decision. Instead, what happens is we set up these funds with big headlines and three-letter acronyms, because everyone likes three-letter acronyms. And money pours in there and say, I'm a good citizen. I do ESG. And you go, how do I measure that? Because I gave it money. No, that's an input. What we need to care about is the output. And the output's not measurable yet. And when we can measure it and it becomes enforced, then we can do it. Sure. Go ahead. By the way, if he likes the social part, if any of the women would like to ask questions, that's good too. I've been told, and I don't know if this is true, that you need to set aside time to read it. It's not like a fall asleep and read book. It's like a learning book almost. And so that I've heard from people. I don't know if that's true. Two is to look at yourself through the lens of the stories. Like, not how does it apply to me, but if I was that, what would I do? If I was that person in that story or in that situation, what would I what would I do? And then the last thing is, what is something that I take away at the end that causes me to do something different? Not think something different, but do something different afterwards. You want to take that first?
Yeah, sure. There's many trillions of dollars of value capture within the startup ecosystem. There's reason to believe that these companies are steady, and while there could be valuation inflations of, orders of magnitude, there's real objective staying power to a lot of these entities being created at a really meaningful scale. In addition to that, the process of scaling these organizations, adding enterprise value to them, having them go to market, has continued to be increasingly mechanized. There's a ton of individual heroes at all these companies and teams that are making all these things happen, and the sausage gets made differently at every place. But fundamentally, the kind of classical, stereotypical throw a dart at the board model of venture capital is starting to see strong patterns around how these companies scale and what the risk-reward profiles are in scaling them. And those patterns become more concrete and less random at higher scales of maturity of businesses, particularly recurring revenue software businesses. So what we're seeing is a bifurcation of the industry into sort of growth stage and early stage. What we do at early stage is we work hands-on with entrepreneurs at the very beginning of their company, talking with them on a daily or multiple times a week basis, working with them everything from creating their products, building their networks, helping with their hiring, helping with their fundraising, and providing psychological support, among a number of other things. At the growth stage, it's a much more mechanized financial product increasingly. I came from a place called Insight Partners, and they were one of the people who popularized the sort of turn money at scale into this asset class, model it out, run the cohort and retention analysis, sensitivity analysis in the model, and then do as much assets under management as you can manage, driving down the rate of return as high as the investors will tolerate while managing as much money as you can. That model actually makes a lot of sense if you believe that the repeatability and mechanization of the modern late stage growth investing market is here to stay. And I'd argue that until something affects the fundamental persistence of B2B solutions, there's a lot to argue for that being a good model. Cryptocurrency is still in its infancy. It's hard to understand how that's going to impact these sorts of factors, but I think those are kind of the main two approaches we're seeing and how people use VC to build companies and how VC companies will emerge. Maybe you say something about getting into VC and your thoughts on that.
You asked like 3 questions in one, right? So how's VC going to change? How does blockchain, various types, DAOs? Yeah, I'll hit it in a second. How do you get into VC? Go to a startup. So I'll answer the last question. Started a startup, go to a VC, maybe earn a different answer. Particularly a product role and develop a differentiated view. And be curious and read a lot. That's the answer to the last question. So the VC model continues, in my view, at the early stage, like Aaron said, to be the same thing. Add value, give feedback, handhold, and recruit management. And I don't think that has changed. And for most businesses, that won't change. The exception is the one you mentioned, in my view, which is the DAO. DAO, Digital Autonomous Organization. Blockchain-based. There will be some meaningful amount of businesses, particularly around stuff that doesn't require human beings for real, that like with human beings just a processor, which will move on to the blockchain. It won't go in a straight line like it's going. It seems to be going right now. It'll be up and down like these things always are, but in my view, it's real. And DAOs are real. I don't think we have corporate law yet that really knows how to handle DAOs. So a regulatory framework around this is a big deal. We also don't really know as venture capitalists, except for ones that are registered with the SEC, how to hold tokens that enable the governance of these DAOs. And so I think some percentage of the venture industry will be disrupted by this for specific kinds of opportunity. That's what Chris Dixon's doing now at Andreessen Horowitz. That's what a bunch of the firms like Powerfy and Polychain are doing. And they're going to be successful. Not all of them, some of them. Right now, they all look successful. And I think you'll have VCs that really know how to do that kind of stuff, and VCs that know how to do the other stuff. But that will be ascendant in some way.
I just had one thing, just for anyone trying to break into VC. I think there are two big strategies I'd offer. One is that, like, the unit economics for joining a growth firm, doing these kind of growth stage investing, is really attractive for both sides. Because when you're turning kind of tens of millions of dollars at scale, if one person does one productive thing in 4 years, then they pay for themselves many times over, whether that's generating some M&A or some particular commercial opportunity, or even sourcing a deal for them, then you pay for yourselves like 20 times over. So I would really analyze who are the growth firms, who are the people managing large amounts of capital out in the ecosystem. Everyone and their grandmother is trying to get a toe into growth stage investing. There's family offices, there's hedge funds, there's all sorts of non-traditional sources of finance. Spoil, this might not end well, but I'm a very big believer in the power of the cold email and grinding it out. So make a list of 200 people who manage meaningful capital. You could find this data on Crunchbase, cold email them, make them feel like you're the one who's going to be a slam dunk, unit economic positive addition to their team. It could be a good representative of them, and get your way into those coffees, make it happen, and just grind it out. That's the best way to break in. And growth is a much better place to break in than early stage, because early stage tends to run more HR light. The other alternative way to do it is to focus on networking with, identify the best companies and build a mini portfolio. So meet great companies, meet people at those companies, add value, give value to them, get value back, find ways to get just a little bit of money into those companies and to start building your own personal portfolio, and use that also as ground support on a cold emailing strategy and network your way in strategy, is probably the practical advice I'd offer.
What's a specific area of technology that you would say you're particularly excited about, and perhaps something that specifically we in Israel would offer a unique perspective on that the rest of the world would have a more difficult time?
I don't know anything about technology. I'm not excited about anything. I'm excited about the people I meet who have great ideas. No, really, legit. I can go pontificate about synthetic biology and DAOs, and I don't know anything, though.
I like businesses that make businesses go faster. In a world where money is at federal rates of 0%, if you're a business that can accelerate the velocity of businesses in a market where 20 or 50% more velocity drops your cost of capital and increases your valuation in a meaningful fold, in a world where there's a whole old world order being overturned by these new world order companies who are seeking high rates of growth to have low cost of capital, businesses that can engender high rates of velocity with high velocity go-to-market mechanisms are really attractive. So like automating point solutions that all companies need, either as they scale up or as they generate revenue or do other kind of critical things that are out of the line of sight of kind of their core thing that they do as a business that's special and unique in the world.
Which are the most important traits in startup which make you the best?
You'll get different answers from us, but yeah, people, entrepreneurs who are optimistic, resilient, curious. We used to say benchmark, learn-it-alls, not know-it-alls. And who, Aaron made this comment earlier, which is, A players attract A plus players, A minus players attract C players, just life. And so you really want to play with the A players. It's really about the people. No more diversity in the crowd, all the guys asking questions? Yeah, fight it out. What I just said. Optimism, resilience, learn-it-alls, storytelling ability, big one. Storytelling ability is a big, big one. Underappreciated skills, super important. You lost the fight, so you go second, yeah? Make it one. There is inflation. I don't think it's transitory in many ways. But, so one needs to really draw a distinction around these topics. So anything that technology, to Aaron's point, makes businesses go faster or reduces costs, has actually had its costs reduced, right? When I moved here, your own's not here anymore, but when I moved here, not everyone had an air conditioner. Everyone's got an air conditioner. Their costs have come down. We import them. You don't have to buy a Toddy-Ron air conditioner anymore. They took the taxes off them. Same thing with freezers and a bunch of other things and TVs, and everyone's got them now. Technology has taken those costs way down, and technology is hugely deflationary. The fact that all of you, how many of you bought from AliExpress in this room? More people than know who Thomas Malthus is, but, or Amazon, right? And so that's deflationary. It keeps prices down on things that technology can deliver. By the way, more of you should know who Thomas Malthus is. But we have a whole other part of the economy, which is where the government controls it and regulation. And I'm very fond of saying, someone reminded me last night, when the government changed now, I gave one of the opening talks to the senior team at the housing ministry. And I told them that anytime somebody makes an investment by buying a residential property in Israel, they're making an investment that the people in the housing ministry don't know how to do their job. And in fact, what's going on now is an investment in residential real estate in Israel is a bet that the national and local governments do not know how to do their job, and that bet seems to be paying off every time. It's a long bet on government incompetence in giving permits to build and marketing land. I should say that one of my best friends is now the Director General of the Housing Ministry, and he has released, last 6 months, more building starts, which means now the kablanim, the contractors, bid on it, in 6 months than any government ever has on an annual basis. So they're starting to make some progress, but there's a lot of catch-up to do. At the same time that cement is becoming more expensive because there's limited competition, at the same time that building materials are becoming more expensive because there's global competition on that stuff, and so prices are going to go up. And other than healthcare, where we do actually an amazing job of delivering great service, I think it's one of the best health systems in the world, and keeping prices under control, every other thing where the government either has quotas, taxes, tariffs, or bad bureaucracy process, the price is going up, and unfortunately, with great pain and sorrow, it's going to go up a lot. Add on to that, if you want to live in Tel Aviv, it'll go up more, because it's a small place, and that's where every high-tech guy who exercises options or got RSUs wants to live, and it's going to keep going up. That's my view. I mentioned the flaky people, some of them. Snowflake.
Where do you see that headed in terms of the increasing polarization of the political scene and inflation as it is right now?
I'm worried. Listen, inflation is a tax on poor people. There are two great taxes on poor people that the government does. The lottery, it's a government-sanctioned tax on poor people, and inflation. And what I can't figure out in my head is, particularly the progressive wings who think that they're for the people, in theory, want to print more money and cause more inflation, which is a tax on poor people. It's like mind-boggling to me. And I know they got something called MMT, modern monetary theory. We'll never have inflation. Oops. And I'm worried. I'm legit worried. And I worry also that we got people who, we talk about microaggressions. For God's sake, there's like macroaggressions in the world that you got to be resilient for. We can't have an open discussion and debate about topics that matter and I feel differently about without getting angry or offended. We forgive macroaggressions like Eliyahu K. getting murdered yesterday, but a microaggression, oh God, I feel unsafe. And we can't build a resilient economy and a society if we can't build resilient people. And Resilient people requires commitment. It requires a commitment to dialogue, requires a commitment to sounding out my opinions even if you don't agree with them, and even feeling a little bit threatened at times builds resilience. I think that's what Israel's such a resilient society. And at the same time, we've got this economy thing, which is a real problem, around people who are in the technology or 21st century economy and the 20th century economy. And that's a problem here too, by the way. For what it's worth, I think President Obama got it really right at some point where he wanted to increase the technical colleges to give people 21st century skills. He was right in the direction, but the execution was poor. And we got to do this. We are in an urgent race to bring millions more people, tens of millions in the United States, into the 21st century economy so they can earn honest and decent living. I got bad news for you, or good news for you maybe. The government can't do it. It's too slow. It's like still the Pony Express. They won't do it, and it's not their fault. I really don't blame them. It was your job, and your job, and your job, and your job. If you're in this room, you're like in the top 1 to 10% of lucky people on the planet, strap another 5 people on your shoulders and bring them to the 21st century. It's your job. If we don't want to have polarization, you got to own it. It can't be the government's responsibility. We need to diffuse responsibility for this out to the civic society. That's how we get to the 21st century with less ruptures in society. Don't blame anybody else. Don't pay your taxes. You got time, man. I promise you, you've watched enough Netflix shows that you got time.
No, I mean I think it's the main job of Congress people is really to be economists, but people in Congress seem to think their main job is to have opinions on matters that are newsworthy and increase influence. And I got a bachelor's in economics. Spoiler, I know nothing about economics, don't remember anything besides this is really hard and I can't believe that people in Congress need to know this stuff really well. Wow, we're in trouble. I also took a finance of U.S. healthcare class where U.S. healthcare is something like 27% of GDP compounding at a 2% rate with no fiscal responsibility to control it. I don't remember anything from that class. This is at Wharton. I also remember coming away from the class and saying, wow, this is a completely out of control runaway train of a problem with no clear way to stop it. And if there was a clear way to stop it, absolutely no political will and too much bipartisanship to stop it. And an entitlement system that, leaving aside that is not financially sustainable, is based on an average life expectancy that's a few decades off. So I think it's really, what I learned kind of as a growth investor is kind of when you look at the numbers every which way and you kind of can't see how you get lucky, you don't assume you're going to get lucky, you kind of prepare for plan B. And, the U.S. is an unbelievable, vibrant culture, an economic and cultural powerhouse, and some of the most valuable real estate in the world objectively. And it's scary to think that a country that's over-leveraged to its GDP by 130% on the idea that the U.S. dollar is holier than other forms of assets is continuing to manage a budget that way in an era in which it's getting easier and easier to move from other dollars into other assets, including other assets that are maybe more attractive and fungible as well. It's kind of scary. I don't know how it's all going to end.
Don't complain about your taxes. You get great health care. And I also want lower taxes. Don't misunderstand me. I don't want to volunteer to pay extra taxes. But grow the pie, okay? If you bring 5 more people into the tech economy, you will grow the pie. An underlying tenet of all my writing is redistributive economics is not the Torah's way. It isn't. It's not the Jewish way. Our way is to empower people to rise up economically. And if you grow the pie, your taxes will come down. So the best way to get your taxes down is not to go complain to the Knesset, is to bring 5 more people up the income curve so there are more taxes, and then they can lower your taxes. Grow the pie. You can do it. I believe in you.
Okay, and we are officially over time. I want to make sure that Michael and Aaron both get back to their families tonight. So a big hand for Michael and Aaron tonight. Thank you so much, Michael and Aaron, and everybody that made this happen tonight. Michael's book is outside the Tree of Life and Prosperity. If you want to purchase a copy, Michael might even be willing to sign a couple copies. For everyone celebrating, I want to wish everyone an early happy Thanksgiving and happy Hanukkah, and wishing everyone a great week 8 of the semester. Have a great night.